And we're going to zoom out a little bit again with our final fireside of the day on the UI for AGI. Now, there's no universal accepted definition of artificial general intelligence, but there is a kind of universal understanding that it could transform the way we work and live as we know it. We're all around 18 months into interacting with these models, primarily through text now. Hopefully, most of us here have gotten a bit better at prompting. Maybe you found yourself a bit surprised at how you talk to Claude or Sana or ChatGPT, finding yourself saying thank you when they do things that are good, maybe getting a little bit short and snappy when they underdeliver. I know I certainly have. But the reality is that this chat bar is really just the beginning of how we're going to be interfacing with these models. Our relationships to our devices and to the internet as a whole is going to change as these models get increasingly capable. And I think OpenAI's demo on Monday is a testament to that. So we've invited 3 legendary product leaders to help us understand what this future might look like. We have Carl Pei, arguably the Stockholm School of Economics' most successful failure story. He dropped out of his degree in 2011 to work full-time in the smartphone industry and hasn't stopped innovating since. He's currently the founder and CEO at Nothing, the London-based tech brand that's known for managing to cross the divides between art, tech, fashion, and music with its beautiful devices. And just a couple of weeks ago, Nothing unveiled the world's first pair of earphones with an integration to ChatGPT. So clearly a sign of very exciting things to come. Then we have Josh Miller, who's the CEO of the browser company. And the browser company is most famous for producing a product called Arc, which is the most delightful web browser I have ever used. And Josh is really one of the most genuine leaders we know, generous and humble with his ideas in equal measure. And one funny story on this point is that until about January this year, Josh disliked pretty much everything about the current state of AI, while also recognizing that it was going to change everything in the long term. But it didn't take long for Arc customers to come knocking, saying, "Hey, Arc, you're an innovative product. Where's your AI?" So Josh and the team quickly started prototyping and ended up building one of Arc's most successful features to date. Then last but not least, we have the person moderating this discussion, the one and only Gustav Söderström, Spotify's co-president, CTO, and CPO. And Gustav is back here at Sana AI Summit by popular demand, having had a fantastic conversation on stage here with OpenAI's Peter Velinde last year. And Gustav is really one of the most curious minds out there, technology being his great love after his family. And he's just as brilliant at asking questions as he is answering them. So we are really, really excited to hear what he has in store for Carl and Josh. Please, a big hand for Carl, Josh, and Gustav.
Thank you. Hello.
Wow, very strong reception. So Joel asked us to figure out what the UI for AGI will be, and I asked him, like, how many days do we have? And he said, no, you have 30 minutes. I said, that's unreasonable. And he said, okay, you'll get 35. So we're going to try and see if we can figure out what the UI for AGI will be. And we're going to jump right in. And I wanted to start with Josh. So Bill Gates wrote this blog post a while ago about the end of apps, and that the new era was the era of agents, agents that do things for you, many things that you would have done yourself as a consumer. So I want to ask 2 things. You have launched the Arc browser, now Arc Search. And the tagline is that it searches for you. So I'm assuming that you are thinking of Arc Search specifically as one of these agents. Is that right?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. And as you heard in the introduction, I've been a skeptic at times of these technologies. And part of the reason is these words like agents, I don't know if I believe in them because I don't know what they mean. And so I think what I would say is I believe three things. The first is, and it took me a while to really appreciate this, for the first time ever, our computers can read. They can see and understand the things happening on our screen. The second thing, for the first time ever, our computers can start to mimic what we do. They've been trained on everything we've done on the internet over the past many decades, and they can mimic those behaviors. And so the third thing I believe, which relates to this question of agents, is if our computers can understand what we say and what's on our screen, and then they can mimic what we would do in response to something like that, I think, hypothetically, software should move beyond a world of applications. I shouldn't have to go to these siloed applications for these different tools. I should be able to just tell my computer, whatever the form factor, what it is I want to do. It should be able to understand that, and it should be able to go do it for me, at least in some capacity, without my intervention. So do I believe in this concept? I think when people say agents, they think of like a smiley face and your little assistant, and maybe that's what it'll be. But I'm not quite sure, and I think
There literally is a smiley face in your app when you open it, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I like it.
So follow-up question to that. So whether we call it agentic world or not, the core concept is that this is the analogy of a human assistant that does a set of things for you. And sort of the prototypical use case that we often see that I think we saw at Google I/O yesterday was to book a trip, right? So it's usually you're interfacing with several, consumer companies. So you're a flight company, hotel company, maybe activities company, something like that. And now these assistants, they go out and do this for you. So how do you think about this world? It seems like there are a bunch of business to consumer companies that are kind of going to be like, instead of consumer facing, they will now be agent facing.
Yeah.
They're going to face agents. They'll never see the consumer. So it's sort of be on the back end. And many of them monetize with ads. And you can't necessarily monetize an agent with ads. Or maybe you can. Maybe you can convince the agent to buy that product for its owner, so to speak. What do you think is going to happen to these? Are they going to have to switch business models? Do you have a view on like which type of companies will get replaced more than others, or not replaced, but have to switch their view of what they are?
Yeah, one of the reasons I started with the comment about the word agent and what I believe is, actually, I ran into my friend Grace that we're standing right there at the airport on the way over here. And I thought to myself, I haven't had broken bread with Grace in a while. I'm going to New York next week where Grace lives. Be great to get lunch together. And if you think about that, what feels new is I should be able to I can tell my computer now, I want to have lunch with Grace in New York. And it should be able to route and pull what I need. But that doesn't mean it's going to necessarily use those applications for me. It doesn't mean it's going to be typing. It's possible that applications just become more composable. And it will pull out a little thing about restaurant searches and a little thing from my calendar and a little thing from email to send the email to Grace as well. And it'll do that in a dynamic interface that it's generated for me. So I'm really curious what you think, but it's hard for me to imagine a world where there's going to be this one-size-fits-all operating system that you never see any third-party application or tool of any sort. I can't imagine that happening. But I'm curious what you think. I mean, you run one of these companies. What do you think?
I'm just supposed to ask the questions here. Get the easy job. There are no answers. But it's, if there are business-to-consumer companies that now become business-to-business companies, maybe this agent is going to need a wallet to be able to shop on your behalf before this really takes off. It's hard to predict. Maybe things that are focused on productivity, things you don't actually want to do, is what you're going to replace first, where you want to save time. So booking trips and these things are not things that people necessarily enjoy. And maybe entertainment where you want to waste time is going to be less impacted. It's hard to know.
And there's also my answer, I guess, as a human, which is I kind of don't, even though this might hurt my company, I don't want to live in a world where a single company dictates all of the interfaces. So I really hope that there are still third-party something, and the different UIs and the different aesthetics and the different opinions in the software we use every day.
So I think we'll come back to this as we talk to Carl as well, who is obviously doing Nothing Phones and also has the benefit of the integration of an operating system. There definitely seems like there's a lot of pressure on vertical integrations because you can remove friction for users if you integrate your application. So Carl, if we switch from the agent discussion first to, there is also almost like a bit of a common view that this new agentic world is going to need a new form factor. It's not going to be the phone. We've seen things like the Rabbit R1, your main pin, Limitless, Meta Ray-Bans, and so forth. You've released earbuds with ChatGPT in them. What's your view on the form factor? Is it going to be a new form factor? Is it going to be the phone and watch and earbuds we have that morph?
I think first of all, we have to give these companies a lot of credit. When we started Nothing 3.5 years ago, the tech industry was very boring, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we started. But I would say tech is really fun now. There's so much happening, and like all of a sudden the GPT 4.0 came out, and the capabilities increased. You have all these new hardware form factors. I think we got to give them a lot of credit because the industry is in a different place, and we need people to try new things and see what works. Not everything will work. Having said that, I believe that user habit is very hard to change. And if you introduce a brand new form factor, you really got to think about the next step and the next step, which is like, how do you educate the user on that? Is it really a better product? So for us, we don't really believe that the burden should be on a startup company to do that user education. We should be really laser focused on existing products that consumers already love. Like if you take the smartphone as an example, 1 billion are sold every year. I mean, you put your money where your mouth is, right? You love the product. That's why 1 billion are sold. Wireless earbuds, 300 million are sold every year. And I think if you think about the mobile interfaces, they haven't really changed for a long time. Sure, with iPhone, everything got prettier, but the fundamentals of having a home screen, apps, app stores, switching between apps hasn't really changed. So why take that risk that we cannot really afford right now? Why don't we work on the software side and see if there's a better way of interacting with the current form factors?
And so, to both of you, is your hunch that there's so many advantages to having billions of phones out there and watches and AirPods and so forth that this agentic world is mostly going to materialize through the existing operating systems and companies, and hopefully through your operating system as well? What's your view? Do you think there's going to be like do you think there's going to be a new form factor, the pin that you wear instead of your phone, or do you think it's going to be mostly the phone?
I don't think I know, but I think I kind of come back to the two things I said at the top of round. Our computers can now see, and they can understand, and they can do things on our behalf. And to me, those feel more like software changes to me than they do form factor. Now, I could totally believe, again, that the fact that our computers could see, what if you put a camera in the AirPod? I love my AirPods. What does that unlock with multimodal models? So I could totally believe that. And as Carl said, it's just awesome to see people messing around and having some creativity and some fresh ideas. It feels like an invigorating period in our industry, but I think from a first principles perspective, I would expect that the software changes. And as Carl said, we've only lived with the application model. That's a very clunky way to get something done. So I think almost it's like we have our work cut out for us on moving beyond that. My hunch is it probably starts there, but I'm not a hardware person.
So if we assume that it's going to be a lot of iOS and Android based on OS integration, removing friction and so forth, and certainly you could argue that they seem well positioned because, on the web, apps are spread out. On the phone, they're right there. And if you actually are the operating system on that runtime, you can literally see the data if you're the owner of that, even in a privacy preserving way. You don't send it to the cloud, but the AI could look into all the apps that you're using and understanding what you're doing, even run the apps for you. So they seem well positioned. In that kind of world, what do you think the opportunities are for other companies? How do you people always talk about disruption, and this wave is supposed to lead to doing disruption. What do you think one does? What do you think OpenAI does? What do you think someone does to actually disrupt this? Is it possible?
Can I add a follow-on question?
Yeah.
It's more for
What?
you.
Am I getting grilled?
We're grilling Josh.
Because you were talking about, like, let's hope that in the future, and I would also want to see that in the future it's not one or two companies defining the interface of the future. My view is that in the current era of mobile, that's kind of what happened. And as you said, like some of these companies have a lot of strengths going into the next AI era as well. How could there be a world where it's not a few companies that define the interface?
Wow, I don't think I have an answer to that question.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No. I mean, it's a really good question. Look, I don't know. We build at the browser layer, so I think I'm probably betting with my time that I believe in a part of the ecosystem and the software layer that is open. You can move between our browser and any other browser. Our web pages work in other. I mean, you think about on Android, you can't run the Play Store unless you take Google's dollars. Like, that doesn't feel like a great world to live in. So, how do you unseat one of these giant companies, and how do you change capitalism so the value doesn't accrue to a few? Oh, well, I got no idea. But what I am going to do is I'm going to vote with my feet on the idealism that I believe in. And I think the long live the web, and I think the model of the web offers some optimism, especially because in this world of LLMs and AI, I do think the browser layer, I'm biased, becomes a lot more important and a lot more valuable than it was before, and that offers an opportunity. But I think it's a big question.
It seems to me that usually when technology comes along, sometimes it can cause a lot of disruption and havoc in the bad sense, and that can destroy industries. Obviously, self-example was piracy. File sharing came along. It certainly disrupted and destroyed a lot of value. But it seems to me that it is when someone manages to challenge the business model. It's not the technology in itself, it's that the technology sometimes, if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on if you're an incumbent, the new technology enables some new business model that is counterposition to the incumbents. In our case, it was streaming versus downloads, and it took many years for the incumbents to just give up all that revenue. It's not like they didn't understand the technology. They waited 7 years just out of collateral damage. Do you think there are those? We talked a little bit off stage here about Google being reliant on ads, for example, and AI has that Benedict Evans talked about. This is the first time that consumer applications have variable cost, right, or marginal cost. When you click OK, it actually costs money. So you see Google trying to monetize this with ads, and there are good reasons why they could. These could be the most personalized ads you have ever seen. On the other hand, you have variable cost, right? So they have an average revenue per user, how much they can monetize someone. Whereas you see OpenAI just charging for it. So they could potentially say, oh, you want more AI? That's $50 a month, or even more, it's $100 a month. So do you think there are possibilities to disrupt with business model?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is probably the only way, or one of the only ways as a startup. So I don't know the answer to how you prevent the value from accruing to the winners. But if the question is, what shot do you have against Apple, Google, Microsoft? Our bet, at least, is our company started with just a question. Why has the browser not changed? Why does it literally look the same as Netscape Navigator? And when you peel back the curtain, what you find is it's money. It's that Google makes money from search ads. And so what that means is Chrome, your browser, ends up becoming one big search box. The goal of the product is to funnel you into searches and search ads. And so if you go directly after that and say, our goal is not to do that, our goal is to save you as much time on the internet every day as possible, that is going to be very difficult as a big public company for them to compete with. And I think that I don't know as much about Apple and the dynamics there, but they make a lot of money from hardware. They'll make a lot of money from applications. I'm curious how they feel right now in this moment where potentially applications might change or maybe go away. Maybe you don't need the same upgrade cycles that you needed in the past because a lot of the compute and power and value you're getting is off on a server somewhere. Again, moving to the web and the browser layer. So I think going for the business model is one of the only competitive advantages other than your creativity and freshness like nothing has, because they've got the money, they've got the technology, they've got the capital. You have to find, I think, those entry points.
Any thoughts here, Carl?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the business model point. I think it's very valid. Like if these big players are already making a lot of money on their app stores and whatnot, they're going to think twice before changing the business model. There's also something about company culture, I think. So recently I was watching the Macintosh launch with my team. And Steve Jobs lifts the veil and the computer speaks to the audience with a personality. And I was thinking, like, when was the last time Apple had a personality? But they did have a super distinct point of view of the world back in those days. Because back then, they had a culture of creativity, and they had to. They couldn't be everything for everybody. They were very small. They had to find one user and serve them really, really well. But now they're so big, so they have to be everything for everybody. So I think there's something with culture, like when you're very big, your culture changes, your strategy changes, and you might not be able to move fast enough or be close enough to the consumer that matters to catch the next wave.
You talked a little bit about this backstage with me. Like maybe one opportunity is to be more opinionated, because the big companies sort of have to average because they're so big. And you can see that I think you can feel that with the OpenAI announcement, the AI being much more opinionated, and then Google the day after, same functionality, but just sounding much more plain. So that's an interesting angle. If you're smaller, you don't have to average as much, perhaps.
So the metaphor I'm trying to think about is like, okay, that was in the 80s. Now it's 40 years later. How do we take that same strategy but apply the modern tactics and modern technologies to kind of play that movie once again?
Well, I also think there's an opportunity to we're here to talk about interfaces, leapfrog on the interfaces, because those big companies have the privilege of serving billions of people. So it's not even just like people at Chrome or at Apple are, they're very creative, well-intentioned people. It's not just they're the business model incentives, but if you ship something to iOS, it better be intuitive to everyone in my life that has an iPhone. And the same is true of Chrome across cultures and bandwidth and device types. And the responsibility is higher. And so I think as a small company, you can also try to say, okay, well, what's 5 years ahead? Because we don't need 1 billion people to get it today or 100 million people to get it today. We may just need 100,000. It was a huge deal that that Rapid could sell 100,000 units. That was wild. If Google or Apple came up with something that 100,000 people bought that quickly, it would be a massive failure. So I think as we talk about interfaces, that's one of the things I'm pushing myself on our team on right now. Like, let's go for it. Because if we just go like this, we're gonna lose. Our only chance is to try to pull that future forward for some percentage of people and slowly over time make it more and more intuitive for folks. So I also would be remiss. I only come to these conferences every once in a while, and I met Carl at the last one I spoke at. There's just a hunger to these small teams. You meet the nothing team, you meet Carl. And so I think it's not as, a business model playbook-y, but I think there's just something to you meet someone at nothing and I feel like they want it more. Or you talk to the folks at OpenAI and they deeply believe, and these things have pros and cons, but I also wouldn't these companies are just a bunch of people at the end of the day with incentives. And if you understand those at a macro level, but then at a micro level, like Carl wants to win, and I think he has a really good chance.
For sure. It was funny when we spoke the other day, and we talked about form factors. You told me it's like, well, you just wait and see what works, and then you just build it faster, which is an interesting view when you build hardware. Most people feel like hardware is super slow. That's how people think about software, but you seem to have almost a software point of view on hardware. You seem to move very fast.
I think the risks with hardware are just way greater because every mistake costs a lot of money. So you have to be really deliberate about the risks you want to take. But once you have a target, it's actually not that slow. It happens very quickly. But a wrong decision will cost you, $20-30 million just on the product development fee. So gotta manage the risk.
So you have to have a pretty high percentage of being right.
Yeah.
But if you do, you can be pretty fast.
Gustav, I'm curious. I've been trying to get back into running now that it's really nice out, and I should run more. And Smart Shuffle on Spotify is I just have been finding so many good songs by playing my playlist, and then every once in a while it'll drop in something I hadn't heard before. So I feel like of all of the big companies, Spotify has been at the forefront of integrating AI products, even if just quietly, that actually provide a bunch of real value. How do you think about as the market leader that is already innovative, already at the forefront, already growing really quickly? How do you think about your own incentive to kind of take risks like Smart Shuffle, and how do you think about the AI strategy to a company that's we'd be lucky to?
Directing some questions back. There is someone in the audience here I think is very happy right now. I think Sten is over here, built Smart Shuffle. He's very happy.
I mean, the intro called us legendary. I think you are legendary. We hope to be over there one day.
So this is actually part of the next question, how to think about developing product and UI. And we talked a little bit about this. There is the iterative approach and the revolutionary approach. And the question is, do you aim very high and maybe overshoot? Or do you, and we've seen some of those products that, there's this feeling right now that AI is a bit overhyped and not really delivering. Or do you go incremental and deliver value that is not revolutionary, but very clear? And we're trying to do a little bit both. We try to think a lot about leveraging existing distributions. For example, if you have a favorite playlist, we see you as a user, you're going to churn yourself out because you get bored with your own playlist. Could we help you with that? And then you have something like Smart Shuffle that can add more songs in that style. And that really started almost with, it's not AI for AI's sake. It is a user problem of you churning yourself out because you lack imagination. And then where do we have sort of distribution to you? Where do you spend your time already? So we try to do a lot of those, trying to add AI where you already are. Then we're trying to do some things where we're asking you to go somewhere else, but it's always much harder.
Right.
So for example, the AI DJ we launched a year ago, it's a new destination. We're asking the user to, they came in to do something, we're saying, stop, you should do something else. It is much harder, takes more time, more risk, but it also gives you different degrees of freedom. You can do completely new things.
Right.
Same with voice translations for podcasters, where we translate them into Spanish and so forth. That's partially, to your point, you talk a lot about not taking unnecessary product risks. So the thinking there is pretty straightforward. You have a creator who's proven, says interesting things, has a lot of audience, but is lacking a Spanish audience. You can remove the product risk from that piece of content, just translate it and try to find similar users in another market. So I would say the answer is we're trying to do both, but we tend to focus a lot on where do we have unique distribution? Where do users already spend their time?
Right. And what I love about that feature is the elegance of just meeting me where I am. It's within my playlist I already use. I'm already shuffling, and just whoop, it's just right there. You don't have to learn anything new.
So on that, do you have any other ways how you think about developing products for AI? It's a little bit different because you used to develop deterministic products, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you said this backstage. The paradigm used to be that you write one application for the entire world. Let's say it costs like $1 million. You get one user. Now that user costs you $1 million. You get two. Each user costs you 500,000. The whole name of the game is to amortize that fixed cost investment. And as we heard Benedict Evans say, now in AI, you have two problems. One is you get marginal cost with every user. It's not amortization only anymore. But the second is the product is statistical. It doesn't behave the same for every user. It doesn't even behave the same every time. So it could statistically be good, but it could also be bad sometimes. What are your thoughts as you develop the Arc Browser and Arc Search? How do you even user test and think about these things in this world where you don't know if it's going to be the same for the next user?
Yeah, I have no idea. And I mean that genuinely in a few ways. First of all, I got it wrong. I was Mr. This seems like crypto 2.0, staying away from this, it's all hype, was wrong. Then we started prototyping. Basically, my instincts have just been wrong about this. And I'm not saying that to be falsely humble, because we've gotten some things right. Because one of our company values is assume you don't know. So the kind of company premise is, I am not Steve Jobs, we have no idea what we're talking about, but with the right attitude and the right kind of heartfelt intensity and creativity, if we try enough things, we might get it right. That happens to lend itself really well to this new Play-Doh that actually nobody knows what they're talking about. So with all due respect to Bill Gates' essay about agents, I don't think he knows what that is. So our approach has been prototype, 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 prototype again, prototype again. Our biggest success today, I think people would say, is our Arc Search mobile app, which has a feature called Browse for Me, which if you do a Google search and you click Browse for Me, it'll go read 6 web pages for you, summarize it, and give you an answer. That feature was horrible the first time I tried it. And it was only after this really unique approach someone on our team took to training, fine-tuning a GPT 3.5 model using GPT-4 and changing the user interface just a little bit to do pull quotes like this and verify the pull quotes, these tiny, tiny changes. And so, though it's not very scientific and I wish it sounded cooler, our answer has been just be out there, out at the front, trying faster, being more creative. It's just too new, and it changed, what, 24, 48 hours ago? Someone asked me backstage, what do we think of GPT-4o? I have no idea. The team's on it right now. Maybe we'll change how Browse for Me works literally tomorrow. So that's thrilling, I think, if you're willing to just say, you got to just be out there messing around.
Can I ask you, Carl, as this panel is about user interfaces, mm-hmm. Obviously this era started with a text box, and mm-hmm. in a way, the text box is the ultimate interface, because now for the first time you can ask a computer literally anything. It also feels like it goes back to the command line days, and very few people figure out to get skilled at command line usage. And it seems like the graphical user interface was a good innovation. What do you think the user interface is going to be? How do you think it's going to evolve? Any thoughts there? Do you think it's still going to be apps even, or something else? Or
I think it all depends on the time horizon we're talking about. Like in a longer time horizon, it's going to be your assistant personified, right? Like robots and stuff, or Neuralink will work, so it's kind of implanted into us. But in the immediate future, I don't believe the apps are going to go away. Just like how people love their smartphones, they really love their apps. They love their Instagrams, their TikToks, their waste time apps, right?
Yeah.
You can't just remove that from them. So it will be a very gradual process. I think the LLM started off with text only, but humans are very visual creatures. We process way more data through what we see. So I think the intermediate step before the robots and the brain implants is hybrid. It should know you well enough. It should know what devices you have in front of you, available to you, and then generate the best UI for you, based on what it knows about you, based on the context, based on the devices. So I think that's the middle step.
That's a great point. I mean, one of the things that I think is not spoken about enough about this technology is the bit of it can understand what's going on, which may not mean an interface change at all. You know, I think Smart Shuffle is a great example of this. It's the exact same product. It just brought me a song because it's
Not going to argue with you there.
Yeah, it's great. It gets to know me really well. And so there are versions of this. You know, we just released a feature where if someone says, hey, I want you to review this GitHub PR, let's just bring it to you. You know, that's not even using AI. And so I think there's a world in which the interfaces stay very similar for a period of time. But what changes is it's more precise understanding of who you are and what you do. And that might mean more proactivity in bringing you things that you need. I do think at some point it will change, if not sooner than we think. But I think a lot of people focus on the input. Yeah. Is it going to be text? I think there are not that many ways that humans can like tell a thing to a thing. It's probably going to be a combination, and it's going to be multimodal. I think it's the output that gets really interesting. I think that's where my instinct is. It's going to be maybe more dynamic than the world that we have today, and where I think, you know, applications like Spotify that are these big things with many parts might become more composable in how things are brought to you.
So I want to drill into that, both what you said about, you said in passing, sort of something I think is very important is that it just then generates the right interface for you. That I think seems very reasonable. So there's an economist named Ajay Agrawal who has a nice framework for AI. The net of it, saving like a really good talk actually, is that if you think about it in economic terms, one way of thinking about this is what AI does, it brings the cost of writing code to zero, right? It used to cost a lot of money, you need to hire someone, so you would only write code for things that you would use multiple times. Now you can literally ask a question, the agent could write a program for you, not just the algorithms, but why not also the UI? For that specific thing that you're only going to ask once, present the perfect algorithms and UI for you right now, and then just throw it away. And it can be done in 2-3 seconds. So if you just reason about the cost of programming going to zero, these things are probably going to write custom code for you all the time eventually. And then you can end up in this world where this smart AI understands a lot. And it seems to me it might just sort of generate the right app. I mean, maybe we got stuck in the app world, and you focus on the web. The web was always more dynamic. Your answers actually do adapt to what they look different. Yeah. Sometimes they answer with a bullet list. Yeah. If it was a recipe, sometimes they answer differently, right? So maybe apps was like a middle stage of stale UIs, and we go back to more dynamically generated things.
I'm actually very torn on this question because technically we can in the future just generate the UI. However, there's also the point about muscle memory. You already remember how to use everything. So might be a boring answer, but I think the reality is we gotta meet in the middle. Like we gotta consider what use cases muscle memory is really important for, and which use cases we can dynamically generate the UI.
I think Carl made a great point before about TikTok and Instagram and where we spend our time. Because I think it's very easy at a conference like this, on a stage like this, with interests like we have, to get really excited about some of. For example, it's always a red flag to me if anyone demos trip planning. That to me just means they don't.
They always do.
They always do, and it means they do not know what to do with this product. Because I think if you look at time spent,
trip planning or wine tasting, one of those.
Yeah, yeah. And if you look at what people do, even in a product like Arc, they're spending a lot of time in a very few number of web applications. They're not actively going down rabbit holes and all the things that we like to talk about. They do that sometimes, but that's, I think it's really, one of the things that's on my mind is and this is someone who's working on what some people would call productivity software, what are the consumer applications that are going to come out of this technology? How is it going to change how humans interact with each other? How is it going to change how they watch the equivalent of videos on TikTok or discover things on Instagram? So I think that may be an argument against things that I've said, is there just not enough moments in your day and actions in your day where you want this new agentic world that does things differently and is novel to use, because most of the time on your phone, you're kind of just doom scrolling Instagram or Twitter or something, and there's not much you can do there to change. So again, that's not a very optimistic take. Obviously, it's not what I believe deep down, but it's worth reasoning about and considering secretly when we're home on the toilet. What are we really doing on our phones? And I'm not sure it's like browsing the web on rabbit holes, maybe, but I'm not that interested.
Planning trips and wine tasting.
Yeah, you know what I
all
want to
the
do is
time.
a wine tasting, and yeah.
But it is a good point. Like
There's a disconnect.
These demos always demo things that people with a lot of money do seldomly in Silicon Valley,
Right.
all the time.
Right. And it's even something I've thought about, like with our product. It's like, you know, the things people will browse for me is like, my toilet is running, how do I fix it? And they don't want like 18 UI generated. They just like, just fix it for me, please. Stop, make it stop. So, but I think that's exciting because there's ways that we can address those things too. But we always go to.
So maybe we have two extremes then. One extreme is like there are no apps, UIs are generated on the fly, and then probably by the OS or someone because they need all that information. That's one extreme. But to your point, I think if we took Spotify and we moved all the buttons around every time you started it, churn would be 100%. People get very angry because habits are very important. So you probably don't want completely new UIs to learn every time, but it seems like there is some value in being able to customize to use cases.
It's a question of time, I think.
Yeah.
Over time, I think the things will become more fluid and generative, but in the beginning, we need to latch on to what we know as consumers of these products. It's going to be a step-by-step process.
Yeah.
But on the interface point, I think one of my stronger opinions is I do think the value will accrue to the operating system level or the equivalent of it, because I do think to take advantage of these new tools and their new capabilities, you need to be able to observe what people are doing in their digital lives every day in order to see and read and understand and then do things based on that understanding. And you also need to be able to act on that understanding, do things on their behalf. And so you need access to applications. And so I think even if you look back at the last three kind of evolutions in computing, you know, from business machines to the personal computer, from the personal computer to mobile computing, from mobile computing to web-based or cloud computing, the winners were all people that defined the interface, right? Microsoft with personal computing and desktop computing, Apple with mobile computing, Google with web-based computing. And so I don't know what it will be. I don't know where it's on the spectrum, but one of the scary things, if we don't want the same companies to dominate and we want an upstart to have a chance, is I do think most of the value will accrue to the interface layer. At least that's where it has historically. And it also seems, in terms of where we are in time, the technology really necessitates that horizontal coverage of a person's life and an application runtime underneath.
So to your point of people mostly doing boring things a lot rather than very exciting things that you demo seldomly, we've said that we have no idea what the future is going to be. I think no one does, but let's try anyway. So one framework to think about the future based on this economic framework is that if the cost of something goes down, you're going to do a lot of it. So if the cost of coffee goes down, people are going to drink more coffee. Its substitutes, tea, is going to get wiped out, but its complements, you know, sugar and cream, is going to explode, right? So if we think that, you know, the cost of writing code, the cost of cognitive tasks in general just goes through the floor, it becomes very cheap. It seems reasonable. We're going to do completely new things. So Ben Evans often takes this use case of when digital spreadsheets came along. Like a lot of accountants, they were doing that computation, so a few jobs disappeared, and everyone thought it would crash. But what actually happened is we just started doing way more accounting. We started analyzing and projecting things that you know were mundane and didn't make any sense when they were expensive. But now that they're basically free, you just do more of everything. Do you have any sense of weird things that while they're sitting on the toilet, we would do much more of in this world?
I have a spicy recent take that I'm probably going to regret saying, but I just came back from paternity leave. We just had our second, and I really took a 6-week paternity leave, and I didn't actually touch my laptop for 5 weeks. I didn't open it once, and I run a desktop browser company, so do that what you will. And I loved it. I mean, I did not miss my computer at all. And so there's a lot wrapped up in that. It's a special time in our life and in our family, and But part of me wonders, at moments, do we want to actually kind of kill the web browser? Is success case for our company not that people are going to do so many more rabbit holes and so much more on the internet, but you're going to actually use your computer and your browser less and less? And so I know that, on paper, it really seems like it should be the opposite. And as you said, it gets cheaper. We should do more of it. But kind of at that human, honest level, if I didn't need to touch my laptop to do the things I need to do in my life, I think I would be pretty happy. So that's not from the perspective of like technology and screens are evil and they should all go away. That's not what I'm saying. But if I need to book lunch in New York with Grace and I can just be like, hey, book lunch in New York with Grace, and it hits me back some questions on my phone, do I need my computer in the traditional sense? I don't know.
I really liked Joel's presentation around productivity because it's something I really believe in. I believe that technology fundamentally always enables humans to do more. So I think in a way, productivity will go to zero, right? The cost of productivity will go to zero. We're going to be able to do a lot more with the finite resources that we have. So then we can do way cooler stuff. We can go explore other planets. We can, I don't know, whatever the imagination can lead us to.
Very cool. So with that, I think we are at time. I don't know if we solved UI for AGI, but let's ask some questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.